right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. This is the first live conversation from the Black Tennessee Voices Facebook group, and I'm really excited to have Ashford Hughes with us. He is the executive officer for diversity, equity, and inclusion for Metro Schools. And thank you for being here, man. I appreciate it.
Man, happy to be here. Happy to be here, and loving this new format. So happy to
Yeah,
contribute too, brother.
yeah, I really appreciate that. So my first question would just be like, you've been at your new position for about 9 months. Can you first remind our viewers what you do, and tell us what you've learned in your first year.
Absolutely. So again, man, working with Metro Nashville Public Schools, something really close to my heart. One of my missions is to, and this is my mantra first and foremost, the vision is to make certain that we are fixing injustice and not fixing kids. So what I'm here to do is kind of set the groundwork from a global perspective to make certain that we have a defining understanding of what we mean when we talk about equity, right? And we know that equity is not equality, and that is what most people mean off the time, most of the time. So I'm making certain that we recognize what equity is, and that is that every student, regardless of their race, zip code, regardless of the economic stance, has what they need and when they need it in order to achieve the most opportunity and to achieve their academic potential. So my role is to look at all the factors across our public education space to make certain that we do have an equity lens and we have equity-minded leaders in place that are working with our students to create the conditions where race, where zip code, and those negative deterrents don't factor in to the quality of education that a student receives. Now that's the policy, that's the practice, that's the in classroom settings. I also supervise a strong school choice team that makes certain that we look at how do we provide parents opportunities and access to different choices that they have for their students, whether they want to go to their zone school or whether they want to go to another school across the county that they feel fits their child's needs. So I'm excited, man, to be here and really to be helping to express and amplify the values of what we care about within Metro Nashville Public Schools. Man, I tell you what I've learned over these 9 months. Now, granted, I'm coming into a school system that has 82,000 students in the middle of a pandemic, right? In the middle of the first, we're doing a lot of first evers, right? I think what I'm learning is that, man, we have a lot of people in the district that really are hungry for our school being more transformative and not so much mitigated. We're trying to do programming and initiatives, but people really want to get to root causes, right? I think what I'm also learning is that this is a very complex system, right? So when I talk about shifting and transforming the school system, it's not just about the classrooms and it's not just about the teachers. It is about a system, right? The system that has been in place for hundreds of years, right? Our education system. But I'm finding we have a lot of people in this district that really care about our kids, that really want to see our kids be successful and are looking for guidance on knowing how to get there, on how to shape a different equity lens moving forward. I mean, I'm gonna tell you, I'm also finding like we have a lot of challenges and a lot of barriers. And a lot of it doesn't have to do with MNPS, the teachers or the structures that we deal with, that we can operationalize. A lot of the barriers and challenges that we face are part of a larger city construct, whether it's housing, whether it's the economics of families and jobs. A lot of that, MNPS can't solve for, right? But it is things that contribute to what our students come into schools with. It's a contributor into what our teachers and our support staff and central office, what they bring to the table when they show up in classrooms. So I think I'm in a constant state of still learning. I've been going for these last 9 months on a listening session of sorts and have been really working with partners to have listening sessions with teachers, students, communities to hear like, what does equity mean for you? What does it look like to have an equitable school district? And man, I'm finding folks are really transparent. Folks are really honest, and the community, particularly our parents, particularly African-American parents, those parents that are English learning families, they are really hell bent on achieving equity for their students so that their students have opportunities to thrive in Metro Public Schools as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. So, just to, kind of go further into what you've talked about right now, if you could kind of give, a path to what your career right now, what do you hope to see accomplished in your time there? Like, you kind of give me like a kind of a path of where you want to go.
Man, the vision is to leave this place where, so again, I talked about I have a 8-year-old and a 2-year-old, right? So I know what my non-negotiables are for their education. So my goal, but the vision is to make certain that I leave this position, right, and leave this office and create this office where then every kid has the same opportunities and non-negotiables and type of education that I expect and demand for my kids. So what does that actually look like? That makes certain that I leave this location, making certain that central office, that our district has a commitment to the ideology of racial equity within public education. Many times people often want to equate equity with a list of 5 or 6 strategies. While that is important, equity is also a paradigm shift, a mind shift, an ideological shift that's saying we need to focus on and look at what is the root cause to why many of our student subgroups, many of our student populations are still disproportionately affected by negative outcomes. That's one thing. I want us to leave with a commitment to racial equity within education. I mean, I also want to make certain that I set the conditions, that I work with our leaders to create the trainings necessary to make certain that we develop equity-minded leaders, that we take a concept into theory and practical application within the classroom. It's all good for me to talk about implicit bias and how that shows up and how we need to go and be more equity-minded, how we need to be more culturally responsive. But I want to be able to leave the toolkits and the guidance that teachers can actually implement this within the classroom. And that's going to take some time. It's going to take some reflection from teachers. That's going to take reflection from the leaders within this district. But it is vital because we have to create a liberated education system so that our historically marginalized students have access to the opportunities that other students have. So when I leave here again as well, the vision is to make certain that we have a world-class education system, whereas zip code and race does not factor in to your success. It is not baked into the predetermination of what happens with a child moving into post-secondary degrees. I think we can get there, but this is going to take a lot of work, man. So my goal also within this spot is to build the necessary relationships at the city level outside of MNPS so that we are all creating a table that is co-created, that is facilitated with one thing in mind: students, right? Not adult feelings, not adult, who has the biggest degrees, who went to what school, and who has the best theory, but how does what we can put together transform the access and the quality of education that our students have. And that, again, that goes back to that concept. I want us to lead with the idea of fixing injustice, not fixing kids, because we can work with kids. Kids innately are smart. Kids innately have all the tools necessary to be quality and be scholars within our school system. It is the adults' responsibility to pull that out and to nurture that. And I hope to be able to bring that forward.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I admire about you, Ashford, is how dedicated you are to the mission of racial equity. And one of the things I've been noticing, when I watch like cabinet member hearings, there seems to be a lack of knowledge of the difference between equality and racial equity. And I'm sure those who are watching right now can explain that and are aware of those differences. But how can we explain the difference to those who may not understand?
Man, I think I'm gonna put an illustration, and hopefully that can, so for one, equity is about justice and fairness. Equality is about sameness. right? To achieve racial equity, we need justice and fairness. So for instance, with education, equality says every kid gets a pair of shoes. Equity says every kid gets a pair of shoes that fits their feet, right? So equity, you know, everybody's equity, equity, equity. It's the new buzzword. Like diversity was the buzzword a couple of years ago. Inclusion has been the buzzword. Now everybody is equity, equity, equity. Well, equity comes at a cost as well. Equity you have to work at, right? Equity is, it's a noun in Webster's dictionary, but it takes action to achieve equity, right? But again, I go back to equity is about aligning specifically what people need at the time that they need it in the best way that they can receive what they need. Equality is we all get the same. And we know that innately everybody does not show up in these places at the same place and at the same point in time in the race, facing the same obstacles. Equity and equity practices, equity policies takes those into consideration, by which we look through a lens that says, what do I need to do to make certain that this student that is addressing and facing this barrier has what they need to overcome that obstacle to get what they need to be successful.
So it's so, I really like that analogy of the shoes being able to fit that specific person, because there are people who may be really far back compared to other people, and it's about getting everyone back to that point to where you can have an equality, right? That's really really nice. And you're very vocal in the group, and there was one thing that happened, that I want to start with, which is a situation where TSU President Dr. Glenda Glover accepted a seat for Civic's board of directors, and then turned it down. But you said a profound thing to me, which was not all good money, not all money is good money. Could you expand on that and explain further?
Yeah, and being an alum of TSU, being a part of part of the local alumni chapter, and being an individual that donates money every month for the last several years to my university, I think it's important that we have a strong role to play in our community and in our state and in our country, specifically as an HBCU when it comes to looking at criminal justice reform. From my vantage point, having worked within the mayor's office and worked with individuals looking at policing reform within the city, knowing individuals like Keita Haynes and others that are like actively working on this issue, I just thought for this right now, there are better ways that I would have liked to see my university participate in opportunities to address the school to prison pipeline, the mass incarceration of Black and brown people throughout this country, rather than serving on the board of directors. While I may understand sort of the concept of what was going on, I would have liked to have seen there be a little more community engagement with the alumni, the participating alumni that are active with the university, that are active ambassadors for the university. Because at the end of the day, while Core Civic might say on paper what they are trying to do, I did not want TSU to be used as a face to try to say, look, we have this Black-led organization, they're with us, we need to be supported. Because at the end of the day, they are a public company. And as a public company, they are beholden to their stakeholders to make profit for their company. And no matter what education type of reentry program they wanted to discuss, it still is a for-profit entity that is supportive of the incarceration of mass numbers of Black and brown people in this country. And there are other ways, there are so many other organizations right now that have boards and commissions that TSU could really, really dig their teeth into here locally, right, to support those efforts. That I just thought that it wasn't a strong look for Tennessee State. We are a proud university, man. We have a long history of fighting on the right side of people, and we can educate and be a part of this conversation, but be in a way that doesn't put us at a table that we don't have to be at. So when I say all money isn't good money, every table we don't have to sit at. It's not that important for us to be at every table. And as you might have seen in a Facebook post she wrote recently, a friend of mine, Kia Jarman, wrote, oftentimes we are too busy trying to sit at somebody's table to gain access. As Tennessee State University, we can start our own table. We can create our own table to be at and say, we are here as an institution and we are going to work with the factors, and we're going to build our own table of education, of reform and justice to change that narrative. We don't need to sit at core civics table to make certain that we're stopping the prison pipeline right now.
Yeah, and I think that, I've realized this is sort of a conversation that really speaks to, or a situation that speaks to, morality. Especially for Black people, you have that power to give back. And where where's that give and take at? You know what I mean? How do we? What am I? How much am I giving? How much am I giving of my morality to the situation? And to continue, you're seeing a lot of Black people who hold power, whether through music, sports, or just some type of celebrity, give back in a major way. One example that I think of, I was watching a game last night, and I saw that the NBA All-Star Game was giving, its earnings to HBCUs. So, how important is it for Black people who are in power to actively give back?
Man, I think that's important, right? That's an important role to that, right? We've seen throughout history, many of our foremost scholars talk about that, whether it was W.E.B. Du Bois, whether it was Booker T. Washington, whether it was Marcus Garvey and others, right, in the early 19th century, right? So we know it's important to give back, right? I think we all have a responsibility. That one thing I don't take for granted, I don't take lightly, when I was in the mayor's office and when I'm here now, and had conversation with both mayors that I work with and our superintendent, is that for me personally, it's never about a seat or a position, right? I'm smart enough, I have enough confidence in myself where I can go and get a job and earn a living. My role is to always add value and to always make certain that I'm fighting on the right side of justice so that we can eliminate barriers to opportunities for Black people, brown people, low income people. Yes, do we need to give back? Absolutely, right? But we also can't put the onus on ourselves to solve everything by ourselves as well, right? I've had to learn that the hard way, because this work that we do, the folks that are on the battleground every day, and some are in battleground in different levels, right? Some are like myself that are in the system trying to transform and create new systems. Some are in the streets with the people working day to day, making sure they count those needs, like Gideon's Army, Equity Alliance, those folks. But we all have to understand we all are working together to create community, to create the beloved community, so that we as African Americans, so that we as Black people can have a liberated existence, a humane existence where we can just be left alone to live, thrive, and prosper. I always tell my friends, man, we have an obligation. I teach my son, each one teach one, right? We always have to give back, whether it's in education, whether it's just the knowledge of anything, economics, but we can't own that all by ourselves, right? We also have to address those others that are in power, that as much as we want to give back, there's still always someone else that's trying to keep us, but to a certain distance, right? So we have to push our allies now, as we are going into a new type of defining term, our co-conspirators, to really work with us in this effort, so we don't just feel so much pressure, man. I'll be honest with you, bro, man. It is a lot of pressure oftentimes to produce, to be successful, and to change systems for our people, and not just for Black people, but for brown people, for low income people, because we all are seeking liberation. We all are seeking access to quality enhancement of life. And that can be a lot to put on our shoulders, particularly if it's just you and you feel like you don't have the external community support moving forward. But giving back is vitally important. That's why I donate and have started donating to my university like 4 or 5 years ago. Every month, no matter what, I have a certain amount that comes out, because I said no matter what goes on at my university, I need to give back. Whether it's a decision I don't agree with, I'm going to give back. That's the number one reason why I'm involved in 4 young men mentorship programs right now, based off of the way that I grew up, based off of my life experience, the only reason I got involved in politics was to make certain that people that look like me, especially black men, did not end up dead or in jail because of the public policies and the outcomes that were derived for them by other people that did not look like me. So giving back is number one, right? But it has to be not just me doing it all alone. It has to be collective. But then we have to hold our allies accountable to supporting us and giving back as well.
And I think in my perspective, last year, I really feel like I could have. One thing that really echoed throughout that year was that Black people felt like they were alone, and I felt like that was a prime year for allyship. And now we're in the stage where I think we're going from allyship to co-conspirators. And so could you kind of, in your own perspective, how could you define the difference between those two, being an ally and just an ally, I guess, would be someone who's just there, who's open to help. Co-conspirator who is like down in the trenches with you.
Man, I think back to your first point when you talk about sometimes Black people feel like they were alone. Man, I want to talk about the complexities of being a community organizer, of being an advocate in a time where people are supposed to be socially distancing, when the time we were quarantining, the absence of community. Like, I don't think we've ever experienced that in our history since 1918 was the last pandemic, right? But I don't even know if we've experienced that type of exclusion from community in the midst of the need to organize for liberation, the need to organize for quality of life enhancements, right? So when I think of an ally, right, an ally is kind of passive aggressive, like, right, we need them, they're allies, they support, right? Dr. King and the civil rights movement had allies, right? When it was talking about, we want you to sit at the lunch counter, right? We believe that everybody should be able to sit there. They were allies. When it was time and Dr. King moved towards, and others have moved towards the economic equity, economic equality stance, that's when the allies kind of said, well, I want you to sit at the table, but when it comes to money, I don't know how I feel about that. That's when the co-conspiratorship shows up. When you have those folks that's like, you know what, this economic fight is going to be another fight. So I need to get 10 toes down and really dig deep in here with you. And we're going to plan together. I'm going to show up with you together. And I'm willing to give up some of my agency, some of my power in order for you to have agency and build collective power so that we can achieve economic equity and inclusion in these spaces. I think co-conspiratorship, and people always ask me, that's such a weird term, because when you look at it, the first line in the dictionary is talking about someone that is linked up with someone doing something nefarious, right? But the real word in co-conspiratorship is really about the inclusion of, planning, strategy in a thing, right? And the execution together in cohesion with someone, right? So I think that is much more of an aggressive, in your face, like, we are really in this, tied this together. We're tied to the outcomes, where allyship in the past has been kind of passive aggressive. Hey, I'm here with you, but I don't want to necessarily give up my agency. I'm gonna put something on Facebook for you, but I'm not gonna show up at the rally with you and, go toe to toe with whether it's the armed guards or whoever
It's
may be
the
there.
black
But
square on
it's
Instagram.
much more aggressive.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. And I think it's just so interesting because there's all these different different signs. I feel like I've noticed that can tell if someone is kind of an ally, or who's just there, who wants to make it, who wants to be there because it's a trendy thing, and people who are co-conspirators who have really sacrificed a lot of their privilege to be on the same level, or to just be there in the fight with us. And one of the other things you were very vocal about in the group was essentially a proposed voter suppression bill that was going to end early voting and discontinue voting machines, which also ended up being removed. But I think that it speaks to a bigger issue of keeping power in check, and one way to do that is voting. But I'm sure we're in a lopsided political climate with Republicans leading the way. So my question is, how do we mobilize voters to polls and educate them on how critical it is to exercise their right to vote?
Absolutely. Before I answer that, I'm gonna step back to the previous question as well. Allyship versus conspiratorship. At the end of the day, for me personally, right, I want to build those collaborative teams, right, because I think they're necessary. But if not, Goody Mob coined the phrase back when I was in high school: "One monkey don't stop no show." So we're gonna keep on moving regardless, right? Like black people, brown people, like we gonna organize and plan and action regardless. We need that coalition, that co-conspirator coalition, so we can show that cross-reference of support. But like, let me tell you, right? I'm reading this book now, Race Man by Julian Bond, and he and Fannie Lou Hamer and those folks, they weren't waiting around, man, to get, okay, we got to wait for all the co-conspirators. They got ones that came on board and they kept moving. To the point about the voter suppression, right? One, man, I want to raise up Charlene Oliver, Tequila Johnson, and the Equity Alliance for the work that they've been doing in our state, right, to combat that, and all those around the country that have been combating that as well. LeBron, we don't have serious people in our state legislature right now, right? We have people often that are, trying to make a name for themselves. They really want to hurt blacks and disenfranchise black and brown people, but they're really just hurting and disenfranchising even the people in their rural counties. If you look at who are making some of these anti-voting voter suppression bills, it's some folks in the rural counties, some folks that are just not serious people, right? When the lady that sponsored this bill is asked, like, what are you trying to solve for? Like, what is eliminating early voting and eliminating voting machines? What are you trying to solve for? And she's like, well, when you vote early, there are some things that are nefarious happen or something, she said like that. And I'm like, yeah, like people actually voting, particularly in Tennessee, where we're like bottom 3 states in the country for voting, right? So it's just like, you have to get serious. So all of this started, I mean, it's been a history of whenever African Americans push the needle and turn out to vote, there's always a repressive tactic to stop that. Important to note, in 2013, one of the most important voting rights legislative provisions was overturned. That was the pre-clearance clause. That was the clause that essentially stated before any type of state or voting changes take place, it has to go through a panel of sorts, a federal committee, to make certain that everything is under the same type of scrutiny and it is equally applied. Once that was struck down, you had immediately states across the country pushing all of these voter ID laws, all of these other voter restriction laws, right? Right now, we see that for the 2, 3, 4 months, the former president went on this national tirade about how everything was stolen from him with no proof, right? The worst type of evidence you can talk about and the worst type of individual are those that provide no proof, but are hammering day in and day out, something was stolen and taken away from them. That's what's taking place in Tennessee right now. And we as a community need to be vigilant. Right now, that provision needs to be put back into the Voting Rights Act of 65. And there's a bill, the John Lewis voting rights bill needs to be passed through Congress now. But here in the state, we have to continue to pour into our support for the Equity Alliance, for individuals like Keita Haynes, for those that are working for this issue across the state, because we have to stay vigilant, because all of these things are going to keep coming to the point where it's like you're going to have to give blood, and you're actually, I don't know what else they're going to try to have come to fruition just to keep black voters from the polls. And let's make no mistake about it. There is no question as to why these bills are coming up. Tennessee ranks literally 49th in the country in voting. Every presidential election year, we have a large turnout in African-American voters, right? And even though this state still remained heavily Republican, they still are following the ALEC, the national model of voter suppression tactics, with no evidence, not little evidence of voter fraud, zero evidence of voter fraud. right? And that's why we have to work with organizations like in Florida. They got felony restoration rights. That's something we have to advocate for and we have to push for. But that's going to take a whole nother level of organizing, a level of commitment that has to take place, not just in Nashville, but in other counties across the country, because these voting restriction laws are really targeted at 3, maybe 4 cities: Nashville, Memphis, and Chattanooga, right? I'm gonna add Knoxville there maybe too, because Knoxville, my home city, has about 17% African American votes. But these laws are draconian. These laws are not crafted by serious people that really care about Tennessee thriving and being a better state. We are in a race to the bottom with the state legislature that we have right now.
Yeah, for sure. And as you were talking, I thought about this column that Kate Craig, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she wrote it last week, and it was about how the Democratic Party needs to appeal to rural voters better. How critical do you think it is? How critical it is? How critical is it for the Democratic Party to cater to rural voters?
I'm gonna think about that. And look, I have at various times worked at the state Democratic Party. I've been the first African American political director at the state Democratic Party. I've led multiple campaigns in rural counties. I've worked with the House Caucus, managing campaigns in rural counties for the state party. Look, at the end of the day, this is a numbers game, right? This is a purely, in this state, a numbers game. We have 4 counties, again, those 4 counties that have the highest concentration of Democratic vote, right? We, in my opinion, right, we cannot delude ourselves in thinking that isn't vitally important. Now, do we also need to continue to work in those counties to cultivate leadership that can, express whatever, our new party chair expresses the Democratic values? Probably so, right? But the focus, we have to look at where the core base and the core values of the party going forward is, right? And based on the numbers game themselves, right, if we don't lock down, and if the Democratic Party, I should say, doesn't do a better job of cultivating voters in Memphis, cultivating more active participants in Nashville, in Chattanooga, in Clarksville, in Knoxville, then we can keep trying to do all of this rural outreach we can, and we're still going to see the same numbers, right? We need to be doing what we can in those communities to highlight what we stand for. The Democratic Party needs to continue to stay in those communities to make certain that all of this is local. Politics is local, man. So those people that are Democratic and they have Democratic values in those cities need to work their asses off in their cities to make certain that they cultivate the young people to get behind them and to grow into the Democratic Party. But as a state party, we have to start with where the votes are. If you look at the recent New York Times article that Stacey Abrams wrote, she talked about this was a 10-year plan that they had to put together in Georgia. And they had to start where their base was, right? Because this takes money, right? You don't grow the infrastructure Stacey Abrams and others have done with a McDonald's budget, right? You have to have money, but you have to have not only money, but there's talent and support, right? So again, in Tennessee, it's a numbers game, and we have to start where the numbers are, grow it out once we get to where we can expand. But I think we have to start with the basics right now. And basics in politics and electoral politics is numbers.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thought because, I think that there was an article that I read that talked about how 20 plus years ago it wasn't like this. It was very democratic, and now you're seeing this change. Because and it kind of starts with the demographic changing into voters who aren't, aren't as educated as others, and it's more turns into the country again as rural areas begin to to command the power in Tennessee mainly, and not just in the Republican Party. You can see that shift taking place. But I was trying to. I saw a comment by Natalie Bell that asked, can anyone comment on the past districting in Tennessee and whether voting districts were drawn to favor Republicans? I don't know if you could speak on that, or if.
Man, so again, I'm gonna go back and say that even first, I'm gonna start with when Democratic Party was the majority, right? So, and I feel like history will validate what I'm getting ready to say, is that while we had people with the D Democrat by their name, they weren't always passing D heavy P progressive policies, right? So there was a difference between being a D and maybe saying, yes, again, we believe in that equality, but there wasn't a lot of P progressive equity policies being passed. So when that demographic shift started to change and people in some of our more urban areas started to fight for more progressive, more liberating policies, that's when it was kind of like, oh, we're not really into that just yet. So that's why you saw some of that shift. With the redistricting piece, that's also, it plays into kind of a tit for tat almost. When the Democrats had the power in this state, the Democrats drew the lines, right? So now we see that there was a point in time where there was the Republican Party or the Democratic officials, some were advocating that we need to have a bipartisan committee put together to draw the lines. I think you have right now Dr. Sekou Franklin, one of the professors at MTSU, really known here in Nashville as well. Also a member of the state delegation of the NAACP. He's leading up that effort right now across the state, making certain that we get community members advocating and knowing the process is taking place right now, right? But that process is taking place, unfortunately, behind closed doors. When that happens, you're going to start seeing districts that look like all type of craziness, where the specific party in power is going to squeeze in every black vote into one or two districts, right? Because what that does is monopolize power across the state, right? So I think that is vitally important that we pay attention to that. Just currently right now, there isn't a public, transparent process to really know what the legislators that are in power are thinking right now. But this process is swiftly coming to a head, right? And unfortunately, Democrats did it when they were in charge. Republicans have taken it and done it while they're in charge right now. And that has not just hurt black voters, that's hurt some of these rural voters as well, right? They think they're getting something when they have this all pluralistic, white rural district. But when those people that are supposed to represent them, when they come to the state, they're not advocating for anything that's going to economically, socially benefit them. The living wage issue in this state, the fact that we're a right to work state, identifies that wholeheartedly.
Something that I thought about was how the black voters in Knoxville, Tennessee, surged in the 2020 presidential election. And I think that goes to a lot of what has happened in terms of, campaigning with, or organizing like with the Equity Alliance. To say all that, what year do you, how long do you think this effort will take? Right? Like, is it a 10-year effort? Is it going to be a 20-year? How do you think this is going to the tide is going to turn, basically?
Man, I guess it depends on, are we willing to put in the work, right? If I'm planning it out, just like in Metro Public Schools, right? We have a system that's been in place for this long. It's unrealistic for me to say in 1 year, this ship is going to totally turn around. And our district, everywhere you look, is equity, 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 right? I think at the state, it's going to take, 5 years, 8 years. It's going to take several cycles in order to create the culture that says we are a different party and we are here to win seats. 8 years, 10 years, it depends on the leadership, and it depends on who's willing to do and put in the work. Oftentimes, unfortunately, we have a lot of people that want to stay at the leadership level, We want to give a lot of political advice, and we want to stay at that level. We aren't working to help raise money. We don't, actually get in there and do the work. And we need both leaders, but we also need workers, right? So that's why when you see what was, the model, everybody's going to point to the model in Georgia, right? But that model took 10 years. They mapped it out, they planned it together, and they executed on it, right? So we have to bring that table together to say, like, this is where we all are going to. And oftentimes, what happened in Georgia that sometimes doesn't happen here in Tennessee, Georgia, some of the leadership in Georgia, they said, you know what? Maybe we ought to listen to the Black voices that are telling us this is what we can do to maximize Black voter turnout. This is what we can do to be authentic in our application, and we can be held accountable for what we're going to tell them we're going to do. And in return, those voters will support us at the polls, right? That doesn't always happen here within our state political party, right? That doesn't happen even sometimes within the local party, right? Oftentimes you'll see that when Black people with experience, political experience in their field, bring solutions based off of being closely connected to the problem and closely connected with the solutions, because for whatever reason, we are not always listened to. And we sit back and we say, okay, and then what do? We get the same outcomes, right? So maybe now is a time that we have the first African-American person that is leading our party. This will be a time that we can take a step back and say, now is a time that we can actually listen. We've done this for so many years, it hasn't worked. How about we listen to different perspectives, different leaders, and say, let's follow that path. So I would like to say, it'll be 5 years, it'll be 6 years, but I don't know. What I do know is that it's not going to work unless we get serious about the localized politics within our cities. We have to, as particularly, I'm going to speak specifically for Black Americans, Black Tennesseans, we have to make certain that we are driving public policy, that we are driving education policy, that we are driving social policy at the local levels, right? So that's why, again, I'm glad to see that we have the Equity Alliance. We have Gideon's Army, and this weekend, I believe it's Gideon's Army, or I can't think of the name of the organization. Brother Jamel Gooch is working with them. That is the State of Black Nashville. They're having a town hall forum about where do we go from here as a city for African Americans to enhance our public policy life, right? So I think we have to get uber serious about localized politics in order to create the economics to support that, so we then can take it to the state and we can have more of a statewide operation to turn this state blue. Because let's be honest about that as well. When I talk about we don't have serious people at the state legislature making policy for us, and that's not everybody, but for the most people that are creating these bad laws, like the transgender law, like this law that is dealing with schools and having the state mandate what discipline looks like in schools, we don't have serious people in office that represent us at the U.S. Senate level. When we look at the individuals that represent us now, or that are there allegedly representing us, these two individuals still don't believe that the insurrection took place. They still are blaming everybody but the people who started the insurrection. And they are not serious people about the business of representing a case and a theology for Tennessee. And that's disheartening, man. That's disheartening. And we have to find a way to turn the state blue so that we can get those people out of office, because they are doing absolutely nothing. Look, if you go back, and I'm not just saying that to be hyperbolic, look at their record. Show me what they have accomplished for the people, not just for Black people, but for the people that they say they have represented over the many years that they have either been in the U.S. Senate, in U.S. Congress, or wherever other political office they have held. What have they accomplished for the people, and whose lives have they enhanced behind a lot of their rhetoric?
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's where I think a lot of younger voters are at, where they can see that there isn't anything really being done, and we'll see in the next couple elections what happens. Just to go back on what you were saying earlier, so the State of Black Nashville Town Hall is going to be It's going to be this Saturday,
Yep.
February 27th. It's held by the Black Nashville Assembly.
Yep. Yep.
Just in case anybody who's watching the chat wants to be part of it, it's going to be this Saturday, and I'll put this in the group later on tonight. But yeah, so this has been a wonderful conversation, Ashford. I knew that when I asked you to be part of it, it was going to be a really great conversation because you're so vocal on certain issues. And again, I want to extend thanks as I did earlier before the live discussion, is to tell you thank you for just being so vocal and just being a leader. I think that when I think of you, you are pretty a blueprint of how a leader should be. You're vocal. You stand for the people that you believe in, and I think that's just a tremendous thing. So thank you again
Man, I
for
appreciate you, man.
yeah. Last question that I would like to ask you during this time is it's an awesome thing that I think this is you're part of this thing called Books Brothers. It's you and other prominent Black men in the area taking your time to read to children to promote early childhood literacy. First off, that's really awesome. And second, how did this idea come about?
Man, I'll be honest. So me and my colleague, my former, Lionel Matthews, is the juvenile court clerk. Lionel and I have known each other since freshman year in Watson Hall at Tennessee State University. So, he has been a close friend of mine since in the mayor's office and even before that. And he and I both are co-chairs of our local Nashville My Brother's Keeper Network, right? Really important to us about how do we nurture growth and development and create opportunities for young Black and brown boys in this city, right? So for me, literacy is like one of the number one equity imperatives that we must face in our city, right? For Lionel, being a juvenile court clerk, he sees these young people day in and day out and recognizes, man, we need to model the type of behavior and success so that we can achieve more. And if I'm being 100% transparent, we wanted to partner with, and I also serve within the Blueprint Nashville, which is United Way's Blueprint for Childhood Success, which is a model around literacy for kids. And we were talking with United Way, working with our school board chair, Christian Buggs, and we were trying to find ways that how can we make certain that literacy gets out to all of our community, particularly the African-American community, because we know the disproportionality in kids being ready at grade level by third grade in reading. And school board member Buggs brought up a great idea that saying, hey, there's this thought that I had about, we had really been working on the idea of Black men reading. And it really started with my fraternity brother, and he's also an assistant principal at East High School, Michael Pratt, who has a Fatherhood Fridays where Black men every so often would come together and read to kids. And this is when we were in person. We wanted to kind of duplicate that and partner with it and grow it out where it was a citywide thing. So Kristen Buzz came up with the idea of naming it Books Brothers, to really have a catchy name or something that we could really galvanize Black men, brown men to read with other kids. And even though we were in the midst of this pandemic and everybody's tired of having to read from Zooms, like we came together. One of our core pillars within the My Brother's Keeper network is literacy, and making certain that we partner with the district and other leaders to make certain that we cut that reading gap dramatically. So we came together and said, this is something we can do. This is an ask that should be easy, given your time, right? The best thing, the most important thing about mentorship is consistency and giving your time with young people. So this was an opportunity we felt to give back to an important issue that we must solve, not tomorrow, not next month, but today. And there was so much support around, man, we can do that. And not just reading while we're in the virtual space, but we're going to have these men consistently be in the schools reading, because we know that modeled behavior for our kids is the utmost important. We need to make certain that, we had a town hall meeting last Saturday. Most of the men that are partnering with this reading, they said the reason they fell in love with reading is because it was something that was modeled to them. And now, LeBron, you may not remember this, but back in the day, we used to get the Jet magazines. My grandmother and my uncle used to always get the Jet magazines. And a lot of the men said they began reading not like, the Raisin in the Sun or these great, you know, black arts of literature, but they started reading the Source magazine. They started reading the Jet magazine.
Yeah.
And that started to birth their love for
Yeah.
reading, right? So we wanted to model the type of behavior. Many of us are fathers. And again, I say this, right? We have a responsibility. When you talk about giving back, we as black men, especially, and I'm gonna say this directly, we as black men have the utmost responsibility to make certain that our young men see the leadership within us and mimic our behavior, the quality behavior that we want as we shape and develop these young men. So reading was one that we said we're gonna jumpstart with that off the jump. And it was something that, man, we got a lot of love for. The kids are enjoying it. And we're going to make certain that we not only read books, but we read books that kids see themselves in. These books are going to be culturally relevant. These books are going to be able to tell stories that kids can relate to, because that's what kids want to read. They don't necessarily want to read To Kill a Mockingbird or, you know, The Great Gatsby. They want to read books about, man, I see that black character in me. You know, those things. They want to read the graphic novel March. They want to read the graphic novel about the Black Panther Party, because that is also a way that they learn history. That is also a way that they learn about the importance of being them. So we're excited about moving that forward. Yes, we have people from the Nashville Soccer Club supporting us. We have the full support of Ingram Books supporting us. This is also a partnership with the Nashville Public Library. Man, we have a lot of support. And since we announced that, we've had, I would say, not fewer than 30 or 40 men say, man, sign me up. I want to be a part of that, because they recognize the importance of reading and getting books in our kids' hands, but also modeling that type of behavior. So this is something that the My Brother's Keeper Network is proud to really be supportive of. And we're going to make sure that this is successful, man. This is our way of giving back.
Yeah, and it's sounds like, you know, it's already a hit. You know, just to answer, I remember Jet. I remember Jet magazine when I was a kid. It was there. I don't know if you remember the maybe they're still around, but Food Lion, the retail store Food Lion. I would go there all the time with my mom, and we would go to, you know, the cashier line, and I would see them, and I would, you know, I would look at it. Right, yeah, right there, yeah. And that was that. I thought it was about planes. That's not what it was. But yeah, no, I really enjoy reading, and I think that that's such a great thing. You know, before we leave, what is your favorite book when you were growing up?
Man, to be honest with you, and I'm going through a series right now. So when I remember the first book that I really loved was the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? That is the first book that I can say that, well, the first book that I can say I really loved was Grover, the monster at the end of the book. I don't know if you remember that one. That was a book that I loved to read. I was always scared, but I loved to read it. But the book that I really fell in love with myself, in love with reading, was when I was in high school, late middle school, early high school, the autobiography of Malcolm X. Other than that, the book, the Sesame Street book, Grover, the monster at the end of the book, that was the one that I read nonstop. And I think my mother still has it in the basement somewhere too. And it's like ripped up and chewed on, because I loved it so much.
Well, that's awesome. Well, hopefully you'll go and see if you still have it. But Ashford Hughes, I appreciate you coming on right now, and this has been a really great conversation. So yeah, I hope you have a good night. I hope everyone who's watching has a great night as well. If you're not in the Black Voices group, please ask for an invite, and I will be happy to accept it. David and Erica will also be there to accept it as well. So yeah, thank you again, Ashford. I appreciate it. Hope you have a good night.
Appreciate it, man. Take it easy. Everybody stay safe.
All right.